Okay, good evening and welcome to our class on metal embossing. There is a link to the handout in the chat, and I will share that on the group on the event page tomorrow as well. So when we're getting started with metal embossing, we are going to be working with some very thin metals, and they do come in copper and aluminum, and you can also get brass. And you can get the aluminum in many different colors too. I've seen it in purple, pink, green, blue. There's many different colors out there. And what we're essentially doing is creating raised designs on thin metals. For the most part, I work with between 32 and 38 gauge. For reference, I think aluminum foil is usually around 48 gauge or higher. So it is a little bit sturdier than aluminum foil, but it's still pretty easy to bend and manipulate with your hands. And any little thing, including your fingernail, can make a note, can make notches and things on there. So you do want to be very careful with this. Some of the uses for this would be attaching to, say, a wooden box. I've seen a lot of boxes that have really, sorry, I apologize. I have to start to my words sometimes. Have a lot of different designs on it, and you can take the metal and mount it to the wooden box or to a frame. I've seen also where people have attached it to mirrors. You can also make freestanding metal things to go over, say, a candle or a tea light, and you can make it where you have some holes that go through so the light comes out, but then have also your raised designs in other areas of it. Seen for use on bookmarks, ornaments for trees, and just or on a book. You could use it on book covers for the corners, or you actually the corner I wouldn't recommend because it would take a lot of wear, but as the topping of a book or something, or on a picture frame decorations. This, as far as period, there's a lot with, I've seen things with embossing of pewter, which would be closest to this. And in some areas, you might be able to get pewter that you could use these techniques with. It's really difficult in the US to get pewter, and also making sure you get pewter that doesn't have lead in it, the Britannia metal. So it could be a little harder to work with that. For the most part, this is more of a slightly more modern way with techniques to mimic repousse and chasing when you don't have access to heat to be able to do it that way. Repousse and chasing is another way of creating raised designs with metal. It usually involves having a bowl of pitch, which is like tar, and you heat it up and you stick your metal in it. And then when you hammer with the tools from the top side, that's chasing. And when you're working from the back side, it's called repousse. So our difference on what we're doing is when we work from the top, that's actually debossing the metal. And when you're working from the back side, it's embossing. Because with the embossing, we're pushing down and it's going to raise up for the top side. But on the top side, we're debossing because we're pushing it down, and it's going to end up raising it on the back side, but depressing on the front. There are a couple different suppliers for the metal. K&S, which is K as in kilo, S as in Sierra, and there's an ampersand in between. I will put that in the chat. Is one brand that is probably the easiest to find. Some craft stores occasionally do have the rolls of copper available in their model making sections, or sometimes where they may have 3D art. But on Amazon, you can find K&S from many different places and on there. The other one is St. Louis Crafting. Is generally I've only seen the aluminum. They do tend to sell larger rolls of aluminum than what K&S has. And then for brass, KNS does have some brass and it does have some copper or some gold colored aluminum that you can get, but this is actually metal flashing. If you just look up flashing, and would probably have to do a conversion chart to be able to see what the gauge actually is, because most of the time it's not listed in gauges and we'll have it in millimeters. The brass is a little bit harder to work with. They tend to be in tighter rolls and it can be a kind of a pain to get it to be flat. And so how you would flatten the metal, because everything comes in rolls, is a rubber brayer. And that is useful for trying to flatten things out a little bit. Another option that you have is soda cans. So with soda cans, you can cut those open and use that for this as well. They're pretty much about the similar gauge to what this brass is or the copper. The aluminum is a little bit lighter that I have here, but the aluminum from the soda can is actually pretty good. Now, you do want to use a lot of caution when cutting open any of the metals, especially the soda cans. So a useful tool to have are cut-resistant gloves. I bought these on Amazon fairly reasonably. And all you need to cut the metal is just a regular pair of scissors. As this demonstrate quickly how easy it can be to cut. I'm going to be good and have my gloves on, but it just cuts very easily. But you do want to watch that. It can cause little splinters of metal. Because I have two different ways that I deal with the edges. One is that you can just fold the edges to the backside. And I've used like a plastic bone folder that you often use with leather tooling to smooth it out, or a ruler or the scissors itself. The other option that I do is masking tape, or this is painter's tape, and put that on the edges. Sometimes I will combine the two because even with the folded edge, I still might have a little splinter. And so just to protect myself, and then you can always remove the tape when you're done working with it. With children, I do always recommend putting tape on the edges to help protect things as you go. Now you do need to have something underneath your metal because as you're raising things up, it needs to have something to sink down into. And for that, I am using Fun Foam. This is the thick stuff. Sometimes this can be hard to find. You could use about 2 or 3 layers of the thin Fun Foam. You can also use camping pad. I've seen people use towels folded up or many layers of paper towels, but that would get destroyed pretty easily. But you can use what you have. If you had some fleece, a couple layers of that would probably work. You do want a hard surface underneath everything, but you need something that the raised areas can go into as you're working. You really don't need to get any fancy tools for this. I'm going to show you some things that I'm using, but you probably have other things around the house that you can easily use. For making the design, for transferring it, you need some sort of blunt object. So this is just a wooden stylus that's often used for scratch art, but something else that you may have on hand that would work really well is a knitting needle. And you may have other things like a bamboo skewer or something that would work. I know some people have used ballpoint pens, but with the pen not down, with it being retracted. Other things that are useful are embossing tools. So these come in many different sizes, materials, brands, as far as what they might look like. And I'm going to show some different ones here. So this one is a modeling spoon from Tandy Leather, but you can get these where it has the balls on it as well for the embossing. This one is actually from a paper embossing kit. This is from a nail art kit, and this is from mandala painting. I will say the cheaper options are going to be the nail art kits and the mandala painting. You can find a set of tools for either of those for between $5 and $10 and get at least 3 tools in the set. And some of them at the mandala painting also come with stencils that you can use as well. And they come in a variety of sizes. And then another simple tool that you can use is blending stumps. This is used for drawing. These come in many different sizes also. And you can find these in most craft stores in the drawing section in different sizes. Stencils are great to use with this, and you can create your own stencils if you have a cutting machine like a Cricut or making them by hand. You can, of course, buy plenty of stencils. You can draw things. You could also print a design and lay it on top and then trace over the design and it will transfer to your metal. So I'm just going to show some basic things for getting started. I'm just going to draw a shape. I like to start with hearts because it gives you practice with working with a little bit of straight areas and curves. And so I'm going to start with the top side. I'm going to put my design on the top and I'm just using the stylus. Now this is not very forgiving. Everything is going to show. Be careful. So I drew on the top side. Now I'm going to flip over to the back. And I'm going to take my stylus and I'm going to go draw inside that raised line. There's a raised line here. So I'm going to draw on the inside and just follow along and trace my shape again. And that will help give it more definition. And so the next step would be to start trying to raise up the design and pushing it down. And so I could either take one of the ball tools or take the blending stump. I like to take the blending stump next because it's actually really quick and easy if I have a big one to just get that shape. And you're just going over the entire part of the design that you want to raise up. Now all the little strokes are going to show on the other side. And so different tools will leave different types of marks. The blending steps tend to be smoother than some of the ball tools. Some of the ball tools will catch a little bit. Some of them are smoother than others. You can see where it's starting to go down and then turn it over. And you can see how it's starting to be raised up. Now I could keep going and make it more defined. I could leave it as it is. Now, if I were going to be done with it, one of the things I would do is I've turned it back over to the top side. And this is an optional thing. You don't have to do this on every thing that you raise up, but sometimes if you want to give more definition to it, then on the top side, go around the outside of your shape with your blunt tipped tool, and that will help give it a little bit more definition. Now, if you haven't raised it up too much, you can also at this point still do a little bit of drawing on your raised shape. If you've raised it up too much, if you start to try to press down certain areas, you may cause holes. That's the same if you do raise it up too much, you can also cause holes. So you do have to be careful It's hard to see here, but I went a little too far here and created a hole right there. You have to be very careful. But I could go through and I could make a little bit of indentation and pull part of this down still and create a different design. See, that hump is fighting me a little bit. So you don't want to, if you reach an area that's fighting you, you don't want to push it too much because then you might cause a hole. Now there's other things that you can do to add texture. This is a stitching wheel for leather. If I go on the top side, I can create a nice little border of pushing the dots down. If I work from the back side, it will create raised dots on the top. Something also sometimes we'll do is take one of my smaller embossing tools and can create a little pebbled texture. I could just trace along the shape or treat it like a background tool with leather tooling and create a stippled effect. Nice, no, the lights. And there you see the stippled effect. And it's the same that if you did that from the back, then you'll just have the opposite texture than you do from what it looks like on the front. So if I work from the back, then I'm going to create a bunch of raised dots versus dots that are pushed down. And this is really the basic idea of it, that I could take a bigger tool and I could go work a little bit deeper on the back and create a more raised up design. So that's pushing it up a little bit farther. Now, to keep this being raised up, you do need to treat it with embossing paste. This is showing the dried paste on the back. There are different options out there. This is one option that I've used. It is from Merc Art. It's called embossed metal backing paste. If you search for that, it should come up for a few different websites. I did also do a check today with Amazon. If you put embossing paste, there are some other things out there. They're usually meant for getting texture on embossed paper pieces and such, but it looks like some of them would probably work for holding on the back of the metal as well, especially if you're going to back it with something else. I've experimented with some different glues. A lot of them will fall out. So if you're doing something that is not going to have something on the back of it, then it may not be the best idea. But if you're going to put something else on the back, like a piece of leather or wood or cardboard, which I would highly recommend putting something on the back of it to help keep it more stable and lasting longer, then you could use some different glues. I've seen some that have used hot glue from a glue gun, or there's some different recipes out there for making embossing paste that you can play around with and see what works. The paste is not level with the back of the piece. It is on some of my more shallow things. This heart is really deep, so it's actually just barely going over the heart, but there's still a lot of, you can see the depth of the piece there with that angle, that it's not filling it completely. It's just in there enough that it's hardened and will help make it difficult to push the piece down from the top. So there are some options for creating or adding color to define things. I played around with a lot of different things. My personal preference that I like is India ink. I've taken the ink and just put it on a sponge or a paintbrush or even a paper towel and rub it over everything, and then take another paper towel and wipe off the excess on the piece. There's still a chance that some of it could rub off, but it works fairly well for a lot of things. Some other options is you can get some wax-based products such as Rub and Buff, and there's some other colored wax things that were generic I found on Amazon that came in a variety of different colors. And you just rub it on and then rub off the excess and just make sure that you're rubbing things into the different creases. So I have a few different colors. They're really subtle. So I said the India ink, I was probably using Speedball or Higgins because I have a lot of that around. Uh, Works really well. Another option for transferring your designs, especially if you're doing something really complex or want to do something with words, or you may have some issues with your hands, which I sometimes do if I'm doing too much of this, is a Cricut Maker or the Cricut Maker 3, the debossing tip. You can use that to transfer the design and then do the rest of it by hand. I've done that with a few different things. I've made some scrolls for AmpedGuard that I've gone through and with the wording. The first one I tried to do by hand, completely by hand. And I don't recommend that for doing an entire scroll that way. But the other scrolls that I've done that I transferred the letters with the Cricut were a lot easier on my hands and still turned out fairly well. But I did all the rest of the embossing and the raising with the hand tools on its own. Okay. So that is the basics of what you need for getting started and going through this. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording and then open up for questions.